Welcome back. You're listening to Get Real with Bob and Stacy. You're joining us for our Leaders and Legends segment, and our guest for the segment is Amy Newmark, publisher, editor-in-chief, and author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. Welcome to the show, Amy.
Thank you for having me on.
So I want to give a little bit more of an in-depth background on Amy. She's a writer, speaker, Wall Street analyst, and business executive in the world of finance and telecommunications for 30 years. She's the publisher, editor-in-chief, and co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul book series. By the way, we'll talk in a second. She has her own Chicken Soup for the Soul book coming out any day now. By curating and editing inspirational true stories from ordinary people who have had extraordinary experiences, Amy has kept the 22-year-old Chicken Soup for the Soul brand fresh and relevant and still part of what's going on in the world. Amy graduated from Harvard, where she majored in Portuguese and minored in French. She wrote her thesis about popular spoken word poetry in Brazil. You're one of the most interesting people. I want to come have coffee with you. You have such a diverse background. It's unbelievable.
Maybe I just keep changing my mind.
Oh my God. I'm wow, this woman, I would love to be stuck at a wedding next to you because you're so interesting.
I'm sure we'll be seated together at the cousin table sometime. I always seem to get stuck with the cousins.
That's awesome. So she has a national syndicated newspaper column and is a frequent radio and TV guest where she passes along real-life lessons and useful tips she has picked up from reading and editing thousands of Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. One of the best things I love about her is she says that amongst other hobbies like hiking, one of her favorite things to do is read books that she did not have to edit. So that's awesome. So
yeah, that is awesome. But you know what's awful? If I get one from the library, I'll start marking typos in the book.
Oh my God! I do
and then
the
I send
same
it back
thing.
to the library with little typos indicated or grammar errors circled.
Oh my
I
God!
get all incensed about it.
Yes, I love that. So I mean, there must be millions of entries of people that send in their stories for a Chicken Soup for the Soul book. What makes for a great story? How does your story get to be so good that it gets included in one of these books?
It is pretty amazing to get in because we'll get 5,000 submissions for one book, and we only have room for 101 stories.
Wow.
And we read all 5,000 submissions, so everybody has a chance because we actually love finding new people who we don't know,
yes,
who we can publish. So we look for stories that make us feel something. If a story makes us laugh, if it makes us tear up, if it makes us write a note for the next editor who's going to read it, this is so cool, look what this person did. If it makes us learn something, think of a way we can improve our own lives, but it has to make us feel something, and we don't like stories that are really essays. Oh, and you know what we don't like? That thing they taught you in 7th grade where they say, tell them in the first paragraph what you're going to tell them.
Oh,
then
yes.
Tell them, and then tell them in the last paragraph what you just told them, and I always end up deleting the first paragraph and the last paragraph because Chicken Soup for the Soul readers are very smart. They don't need to be told what they just read. They already know what they just read, and they already understand what it was saying to them. So I like to start the stories in the action.
Right.
I don't want a story where it's I'm going to tell you a story about fortitude and learning I had inner strength.
Yes.
I would like the story to start out, as I hung off the cliff, holding onto the tree root, I prayed it wouldn't break.
Oh,
that's
I love it.
That's a good way to start a story.
Yes, that's awesome. So I'm curious, in your life, you've read all of this stuff. Is it possible for you to have a bad day? Or do you have to, think back to all those stories you've read and it just inspires you?
I think that, I've been doing this now almost 9 years, and so I have read tens of thousands of Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. Probably 25,000 stories that we've published, and tens of thousands more that I've read that were submitted but that we didn't publish, but where I could still learn something. And so I have learned so much about people, and really, when you read all these stories from people who have been through so many challenges and are going through all these awful things and are still upbeat and counting the blessings in their lives, it really helps you to put your own life in perspective. And so when I have the occasional bad day, and for me a bad day is that I have too much work to do and I'm feeling overwhelmed, I just say to myself, idiot, you love your job, you signed up for this. All of this extra work that you have to do that's overwhelming you, you created for yourself. So stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're doing exactly what you signed up for.
Yes.
And so it's true. I've become a much happier, less judgmental, more grounded, more grateful person since I started doing this job.
Yes, and you must be awesome for like your friends and family when they're having a problem. You can be like, hey, go to Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Power of Gratitude, Chapter 3. And you'll get
this.
I
end up telling them stories from the books, and I do feel like, I almost feel like I've had psychologist training, because when you have internalized tens of thousands of stories, it's like reading case studies, for being a professional therapist. I mean, you do learn a lot about how people feel, how they got there, how they get out of it. You learn to look through to what is actually motivating people. And so I feel that's one reason I'm less judgmental and also much less likely to get angry now, because I try to see right through to what is motivating a person to act a certain way. And I do think I'm giving my children much better advice because of all of this experience that I've internalized that's really other people's experiences.
Yes, interesting. So many people say, and I mean, it's got to be true, I choose not to watch the news because it's so negative, and they say, well, with the media, negativity sells. But Chicken Soup for the Soul is proof of the opposite, that inspiration sells, because it's 23 years of this book that gets, I mean, now hundreds of books that inspire people. So what are your thoughts? Do people want negativity, or do they really want inspiration?
Based on our results this year, they love positivity.
Yes.
Because I just got an email yesterday from our CFO, and CFOs tend to always look for the negative, right? Because they're the guys who are watching the money and the cash flow, and our CFO is so excited about our results this year and is congratulating me and saying, this is the best year ever. Like, I don't know what you're doing, but it's really working. But I think it's because, especially in an election year, everybody starts to get very, very negative.
Yes.
And so between the election process and the inordinate amount of negativity in this particular presidential election, and terrorism and floods and everything else that's going on, I think that people are looking for reminders that life is actually good, and we enjoy being alive, and there's great stuff happening, and we all have a lot of blessings in our lives. And so our book sales are doing awesome. Well. And that makes me very happy, because I know that I'm providing a service to people by giving them some positive messages to read, some stories that entertain them but also make them feel better, uplift them, and make them happier.
Yes. One thing that I want to ask you about, and then I have some questions because I know you have your own solo book coming out, is you've had such an interesting career where you've kind of pivoted what you've done in your career. It looks like out of college you traveled throughout Brazil, meeting with poets and writers to collect their stories. And then you went from there to like hedge funds on Wall Street, and then back into publishing and collecting stories and editing stories. So tell us like your mindset behind such dramatic career changes.
The funny thing is that it's always been about writing. Everything I've done has actually involved writing.
Okay.
Because I've always loved reading and writing. I mean, when I was in first grade, I used to write stories for fun where other kids would cringe if they were assigned a writing project.
Yes.
I would do it. I would just sit down and write stories for fun. So in college, yes, it was all about reading and writing, and funnily enough, collecting stories from the people, which is what I do now. I collect stories from the people.
Yes.
But then I also love math, and math was always a strength for me. And I think going on Wall Street was really combining stories and math, because when you're picking stocks and telling people why they should buy a stock or sell a stock, you're telling them a story.
Mm-hmm.
And you're putting together a convincing story that you have to be a good writer in order to do that.
Yes.
And so I combined math and logic and rational thinking and a very high degree of skepticism with writing so that I could convince people. And I did just as many sell recommendations as buy recommendations. If I saw a stock that I thought was going down, I would let people know. I was never kissing up to those management teams.
Right. Wow. Interesting. So a life of telling stories. That's great. So that's a great segue into the next book coming out in October, Chicken Soup for the Soul, Simply Happy, which is your first solo title. Is that something you always wanted to do, or is that more recent?
That was a suggestion of our VP of marketing a couple of years ago, because there I was with my name on a lot of books, but essentially as an editor more than an author, although there are many cases where I've really written those stories from scratch that appear inside the book.
Okay.
But we always credit them to somebody. Mm-hmm. And she said, you really should write your own book. You have so much to say. And I had been writing a newspaper column for a couple of years at that point. And it took me a while to get around to actually writing the book. And what happened was that I started a podcast in February, the Chicken Soup for the Soul podcast. Mm-hmm. And it was a big hit right from the start. It was new and noteworthy on iTunes right away. Mm-hmm. And it was where I found my voice. I found out how to take Chicken Soup for the Soul stories and my own life experiences and combine them into little nuggets of useful, easy-to-implement tips that people could use to basically instantly affect some kind of positive change in their lives. So once I found my voice through the podcast, I actually sat down and wrote my book. And my book is coming out on October 4th. I'm very excited about it. I just got my copies back from the printer. Mm-hmm. And it is the distillation of all of the advice and wisdom that I've learned from my rather eclectic life and from reading these tens of thousands of Chicken Soup for the Soul stories. It's all put together in one slim, easy-to-read volume with 25 chapters of really easy tips. And almost every one of these tips is something you can implement instantly to make a positive change in your life and to be happier. So I'm very excited about it. I'm getting great press. I just got an amazing review in Publishers Weekly, which made me so happy because I was so nervous about that.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And it was like the review I would have written myself if I had been allowed to write my own review. It was just perfect.
Wow.
So I'm very excited. It's called Simply Happy. You can pre-order it on Amazon or just buy it in the stores in October. But yeah, it's the culmination of all these years of hard work and observing human nature.
Yes, that sounds amazing. So congratulations on that. That is unbelievable. Very excited for you. And now I don't even know how many Chicken Soup for the Soul books are. How many are there total?
So since I became publisher in 2008, which is when we bought the company from Jack Canfield and Mark Victor Hansen, we've published about 134 books.
Okay.
Prior to that, they had published something like 180.
Okay.
But basically, in print now, there are about 250 and maybe 300 if you count ebooks as well.
Jeez.
So is there an end to it, or is there just so many additional niches that Chicken Soup for the Soul can go into?
I keep thinking I'm going to run out of ideas because now it's 23 years that we've been in business. But then I keep thinking of new things. Like we just put out a book at the end of August called Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Power of Gratitude. And it's the first time we've done a book with that title.
Wow.
And it's about how being thankful can improve your life and change your life, and how it's basically essential to happiness. If you're not a grateful person who sees the good in your life, you're going to be one of those sour, grumpy people who nobody wants to hang out with, right?
Yes.
It's really essential to happiness, gratitude. And so the book talks about how you can actually practice gratitude. And even if you're naturally kind of grumpy and negative, you can turn yourself into a positive person and thus be much more successful in life and happier, healthier, etc. So I keep coming up with new topics. I never seem to run out.
Yes. Everybody
Well, yeah.
needs it. Everybody needs the inspiration. Plus, one thing I'll say about Chicken Soup for the Soul books is I don't even know how I buy tons of them every year because they're an amazing gift. Like,
Yeah, they are. They
Yeah.
are, and we're way more popular in print than most books because
Yes.
people want to give them as gifts. Even though you can give an ebook as a gift, people like just my Simply Happy book. I've just given it out, and people in the office are already reading it and
Yes.
highlighting it and like folding over pages on their favorite chapters. People
Yes.
really use them. If you find a Chicken Soup for the Soul book in a used bookstore, you'll often find that it's been marked up,
Yes.
highlighted, etc.
yes, that's amazing. Well, you are amazing. What's next for you? You've already achieved major dreams in your life.
Well, I am going on a big PR push for my Simply Happy book in
Great.
October. I'm going to start on the publication date with an appearance on Good Day LA, which I'm really excited about.
Yes.
And I'm hoping to do a lot of TV and radio and podcasts, et cetera, talking about it. And then I have a business to run, and we have a book coming out almost every month, so it just
Yes.
never really stops. The moment I finish one, I'm throwing myself into the next one. So it's like being in a hamster wheel, except we're actually getting somewhere.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
For anybody that wants to follow Amy on Twitter, it's at Amy Newmark, or you can also visit on Twitter at Chicken Soup Soul. And Amy, where can people follow your podcast?
It's on iTunes, Podbean, every place that you can find podcasts, you can find it. You can go to chickensoup.podbean.com, I believe. But if you go on iTunes and you put in Chicken Soup Soul, or you just go on our website,
Yes.
chickensoup.com, you'll see a link to the podcast. And we have 5 new podcasts a week. So there's
Wow.
something new every
Excellent.
weekday.
That's great. I'm going to go sign up for that podcast now. So thank you so much. Congratulations on the new book and much success on your big PR tour coming up.
Well, thanks for having me on your show. It looks like a really interesting show, and I'll be following it.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks, Amy.
All right, bye.
That's all for this edition of Get Real. Join us again next weekend for more.